Today, we're breaking down an incredible investigative report that peels back the curtain on a modern disinformation campaign. It's one of those stories that starts with a single suspicious email and then just unravels into this complex web of PR, politics, and media manipulation. Let's get right into it.
All right, so to really get what's happening here, you got to understand a bit of recent history. For journalists in South Africa, the name Bell Pottinger sends a shiver down the spine. Back in 2016, this British PR firm unleashed what was called a dirty campaign that just ripped at the country's social fabric. It was a masterclass in manipulating the media. And that memory, well, it's the critical backdrop for the entire investigation we're talking about today.
So you can imagine, with that whole Bell Pottinger mess still fresh in their minds, alarm bells started ringing in the unspiked newsroom when an unsolicited email landed in their inbox. It was from a PR firm they'd never heard of, and the offer just felt, well, it felt way too good to be true.
I mean, think about it. For any journalist, getting access to a former director of Mossad, that's what you'd call prime real estate. This is the kind of scoop that news outlets fight for. The email was offering up exclusive quotes and insights from Yossi Cohen, a guy who might just be Israel's next prime minister. But something was off. The whole offer felt kind of prepackaged, almost like a copy and paste job. And that was the first huge red flag.
And this brings us right to the core idea of this whole investigation, a concept called social image laundering. It's exactly what it sounds like. Think of it just like money laundering, but instead of dirty cash, you're cleaning up a tarnished reputation. The whole point is to take a controversial story or a negative image, run it through the trusted system of the news media, and have it come out the other side looking clean, credible, and totally legitimate to you, the public.
So instead of just hitting delete and moving on, the journalists at Unspiked decided, you know what, let's pull on this thread and see what unravels. Their response was simple, just standard journalistic practice. They asked for proof. All they wanted was the raw audio from the interview and a photo for verification. Pretty basic stuff.
And this, right here, is where the whole pitch just completely fell apart. The PR rep claimed in his email, and I'm quoting here, "You have previously covered former Mossad director Yossi Cohen, but a quick search of Uspike's own archives showed that was just false. They'd never written a single story that even mentioned him." This wasn't just a simple outreach email. It was a clear and clumsy attempt at manipulation from the get-go.
This was the moment the whole house of cards came tumbling down. After Unspiked asked for that raw audio and a photo, the PR guy promised he'd send it right over, and then, poof, he went completely silent. The second he was challenged with a basic, fundamental request for evidence, the conversation was over. He just vanished.
So this raises a really crucial question, one the journalists themselves were asking. Why on earth would you target a niche publication like Unspiked? I mean, they don't have the massive readership of some of the big legacy news outlets in South Africa. So why them?
Well, the answer isn't in the size of their audience, but the type of audience. See, Unspiked doesn't write for everybody. They write for a very specific and very influential group of people. Their readers are the activists, the academics, the journalists, and the policymakers who really shape the public conversation. So the PR firm wasn't looking for the most eyeballs. They were looking for the right eyeballs.
And this just perfectly lays out their strategy. The entire goal was to plant a narrative in what the report calls opinion shaper ecosystems. If you can influence the influencers, you can shape the conversation at the very source. Then, that message just trickles down to the general public through these voices that people already trust. It is way more subtle and honestly, way more sophisticated than just buying an ad.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second because this one sketchy email isn't just some isolated incident. The Unspiked report connects it directly to a massive international conflict that's playing out on the world stage right now. Now, to get the connection, you have to understand a concept called plausible deniability. It's a classic tactic. By using a third party, like, say, a private PR firm, to push your message, a government can create distance. If the whole campaign gets exposed, officials can just throw their hands up and say, hey, we had nothing to do with that. And here is the crucial link. The report argues that this whole PR push is just one piece of a coordinated, global image rehabilitation campaign, and the timing is everything. This effort seems to have been kicked into high gear right after South Africa brought its high-profile case against Israel to the International Court of Justice. The goal, it seems, was to try and discredit that legal challenge and change the public narrative. But the report doesn't just stop at the high-level geopolitical strategy. It pivots to something much darker.
to the grim human context that makes these kinds of PR campaigns so necessary in the first place, the direct and deadly assault on the press. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is cited in the report, 189 journalists and media workers have been killed by Israeli forces since October 7, 2023. Just let that number sink in for a second. This isn't just a statistic, it's a staggering measure of the silencing of truth on the ground.
And these are just some of the names that are listed in the article. They were correspondents, they were cameramen, journalists, people like Samer Abu Daqqa and Hamza al-Dawdo of Al Jazeera. The report makes the powerful argument that these losses are not just collateral damage. They represent the targeted removal of witnesses from a conflict. And that leads to a really chilling conclusion. When you systematically eliminate journalists from a war zone, you create an information vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? And it's these sophisticated PR operations that are designed to rush in and fill that void, replacing independent, on-the-ground reporting with carefully crafted propaganda.
So what did the journalists at Unspiked do? They're faced with the temptation of this exclusive access, but at the same time, they clearly recognized the manipulative, deceptive intent behind the offer. They had to make a choice.
Instead of just running the story they were offered, they published this investigation into the offer itself. And their reasoning is just summed up perfectly in this quote. They refused to become, in their own powerful words, an information laundering factory. They chose their integrity over exclusive access, and in doing so, they reaffirmed one of the most basic principles of journalism. Your job is to report the truth, not to just serve as a mouthpiece for the powerful.
And this story really leaves us with a final and pretty vital question. In an age where narratives can be so skillfully manufactured, where they can be laundered through the media, and where PR campaigns can fill the void left by silenced journalists, who is actually left to guard the truth?